So again, when can we say a CIS environment exists? As what I have mentioned a while ago, a CIS environment exists when a computer of any type or size is involved in the processing by the entity of financial information that is of significance to the audit. So I highlighted this computer of any type or size. So it doesn't necessarily mean nga dapat dako gyud kaayo siya nga computer system, any computer of any type or size, as long as our auditee uses computer that is of any type or size, and then that computer is used by our auditee to process financial information that we need to look into as we conduct our audit. So we could say, if during your study of the environment of the auditee, when you can see their computers or laptops, then we could say that a CIS environment exists in that specific auditee. And then we look at the impact of computerization on audit approach. So it must be clear in our minds as of the moment that auditing in general, the concept of auditing does not change whether our auditee is using manual systems or computer systems. So our theory, auditing theory, will not change. However, our approach in auditing such client would change. Our approach would change if that client, if that auditee is using computers. So first, we look at the speed on how transactions and reports are generated. So before, actually, when we do audit in actual practice, so before we start, mga yumi og unadjusted trial balance sa ato ang clients. And if that client is purely using manual worksheets, manual journals, mga manual ledgers, I'm sure you've seen the physical journals, right? We use them during our basic accounting classes, katong journals, ledgers, worksheets. So if they are using purely manual records, it would take time for them to generate the reports that we ask from them, especially ang kanang starting point jud, which is the unadjusted trial balance. However, if that auditee is using computers in processing their financial information, it would be very fast. I mean, when we request reports from them, dali na siya maabot sa atoa, and then paspas na ang transition sa atoa audit procedures. Then, when our auditee is using computers, we can also expect low clerical errors because ang kanang human error that is inherent in our nature as humans. No, we commit errors, especially when we do kanang daghan kaayo nga mga calculations. Sometimes tungod sa kakapoy, masayop na ta og pindot sa kaning sa calculator, so sayop ang ato ang pag-compute sa kaning amount, or sayop ang atong pag-journal entry, no, imbis nga debit inventory, credit cash, usahay masayop na to atong debit, masayop na to atong credit. But for computers, since these are automated, so whenever we, for example, whenever the client purchases inventory, when they record that transaction in the computer itself will generate the journal entry for that. Hibaw na siya unsa i-debit, hibaw na sad siya unsa i-credit. So that too, as auditors, we would look at it as an advantage because makarely di ita sa ilahang system compared sa kung nagmanual sila, medyo naatay doubts as to the accuracy of their financial information. So that would affect our assessment of control risk and detection risk, which ultimately affects our audit risk, right? So if we can recall, when we speak of audit risk, it is composed of three parts, right? We have the inherent risk, we have control risk, and then we have detection risk. So if the if our auditee of or if the company that we are auditing employs or uses mga high-tech na mga computers, then we could say nga gamay lang ang ilahang control risk, gamay lang ang ilahang inherent risk. So that would mean nga pwede na ta gamay ang scope sa ato ang substantive testing. Okay? Because we could say nga, there is low clerical error when a company uses computers as compared to when they use purely manual records. And then there is also concentration of duties. We learned it in your, I think that's in your second year college siguro, kanang AIS ninyo nga subject. I think gitouch din ha sa inyong teacher ang control with respect to segregation of duties, right? So for example, if you are tasked to keep the cash of the company, you should not be the one to record the transactions related to those cash, right? These duties must be segregated because if ikaw ang nagunit sa kwarta, kung ikaw rasad ang nag-record sa transactions relating sa pag-increase ana nga kwarta or pag-decrease ana nga kwarta, there is a likelihood or there is an opportunity for you to misappropriate the cash that you are holding. Because kay ako raman bitaw ang mo record ani, ako ra po'y nagunit. So, segregation of duties is very, very important when the client is just using purely manual na records. But if the client is using computers to process their financial information, we can do away with some segregation of duties nga items sa ato ang controls. Because it would be the computer itself that would verify the information for you. So because of the lack of human intervention, in some parts of the process, pwede na nato ma-merge or ma-concentrate ang uban duties into that single employee. Unlike kung mag-manual nga kailangan buwag jud, so kung computer, kung na-I aid of the computer, we can already concentrate or merge some duties nga supposedly incompatible unta siya nga duties kung manual, pero kay computerized man, bahalag incompatible gyud sila in theory, pwede na nato sila i-concentrate into one employee. Siya na lang ang mubuhat ani-tanan. And then shifting of the internal control base, so it would depend on the stage sa ato ang pag-implement sa ato ang computer systems. So we have systems development control and systems software control. So basically, when we speak of systems development, this pertains to the development, paghimo sa ato ang system nga gigamit. So you have two options if you want to use computers in processing of your financial information. You can either buy a system, a ready-made system. Pwede na nyo paliton from software suppliers, or you can develop the system internally, just like USC, diba? We are using ISMIS. ISMIS is a system that is developed by IT experts hired by USC. So kaning ISMIS, wala na gipalit ni USC from someone else, but rather developed internally. So whenever we develop a system internally, we should employ controls on the system development itself. So we have to make sure that the development of the system is authorized, and we should make sure that the user department and the IT department are speaking with each other when it comes to expectations nga unsay ganahan nako makit-an diri sa system. And then we also have system software control. We look at the software nga na-implement na. So later on, we will discuss what type of controls, what are the specific controls that we need to have in place with respect to our softwares. So later on, mahibaw na nato. And then disappearance of manual reasonableness, impact of poor system. So of course, if you are using computers, but ang system nga imong gigamit dira sa computer is defective, then you could you could say nga if defective na siya nga system, most likely sayop ang ilahang reports nga na-generate based on such system. Example, one of my clients uses the zero accounting system. So when I look into the system, if na ako'y makitaan nga mga errors, for example, if a specific invoice is tagged as recurring when in fact one time lang to siya nga client pero nag-recur per me ang invoice. So every month mag-generate og invoice. So that means every month overstated sa lang amo ang sales. Kay nag-recur man siya. And then if nag-hide siya on the background kay sometimes dili man na siya apparent, i-log in nimo sa system, dili man na nimo makita nga oy na ay nag-recur diri nga kuan. Nag-recurring diri nga invoice nga in ani for the client, for this specific client. So dili na nimo makitaan. So as auditors, you need to be able to understand how the system works, unsay mga possible errors diha sa system. So we could also look into the impact of a poor system. This would increase the control risk, diba? This would increase the control risk, which in consequence would decrease our detection risk, correct? So dapat tibaw na ta sa relationship ha among sa katong three factors composing the audit risk. So again, we always go back to inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. So remember, if control risk increases, what should happen to the detection risk? Kaya di ba opposite man sila dapat. So if mo increase ang ato ang control risk, our detection risk should go down. What does it mean if dapat mo go down atong detection risk? That means ato ang part as auditors in doing substantive testing dapat dako atong scope to make sure nga ma-detect gyud nato ang errors sa system. So meaning if almost close to perfect ang ilang system, so meaning gamay ato ang control risk ana. If gamay atong control risk, taas atong detection risk, that means ang scope nato sa substantive testing nga i-perform pwede ra gamay lang kay makarely naman ta sa ilang system. That's why if in your assessment of control risk, if 100% ang control risk, what does it mean? If 100% ang control risk, that means totally unreliable ang ilang system. Wa man lami ilang system. So 100% control risk. That means that you need not perform test of controls anymore. Why would you test something you do not believe in? Correct? So kabaw man ka nga unreliable, 100% control risk, 100% unreliable ang ilang system. Why would you do test of controls? Nakabaw naman ka nga, 100% unreliable siya. So that is why you do substantive testing instead. And since 100% man ang iyang control risks, totally unreliable iyang controls, your detection risk should go down, right? Should go down. If your detection risk would go down, that means mas dako imong trabaho as auditor. Dapat di ka masayop sa pagtan-aw, pagpangita sa mga errors. Mo nang ang detection risk mo gamay because dapat gamay ra ang risk nga di nimo makitaan ang sayop. So that means daghan imong trabahoon nga substantive testing. So that would affect our work as an auditor when it comes to substantive testing. Okay? And then exception reporting. So if a client uses computers, you can actually ask the system itself to just display those items that are considered to be red flags or exceptions to the rule. So for example, if the transactions are occurring normally, the system will not generate a report regarding sa katong mga transactions nga normal lang. However, for katong mga exceptional transactions, like for example, in my case, we are using the zero accounting system. We also use MYOB. So there you can actually configure the system to just show you those items that needs urgent attention. Kaya kung normal lang siya, pwede na nato dili hilabtan, di ba? So katurang mga exceptional, like for example, there are 100 bills that are already 90 days outstanding and unpaid. So kana nga information, i-highlight na siya sa system. So maghatag mo na siya itong itawag nga exception reporting. It would only show you information that needs attention, that needs your attention, that needs to be addressed. So mo na ang nakanindot pod sa ato ang computers because they could give us that information. They could highlight red flags. Unlike for manual nga operations, all you can see is the journal. Nya baga, let's say baga kayong journals. Imagine na daghan kaayo nga journal sheets inyo makitaan. Unya ang worksheets. So dili man na mo highlight ang worksheet nga oy tan-awa diri dapita, diri ang critical nga part. Dili man, di ba? Because when you look at a paper, journal, ledger, worksheets, financial statements nga printed, it would not highlight the unsa nga parts ang significant. So dapat ikaw as auditors kibaw ka sa mita. Mo na ang struggle sa manual. But for computerized environment, CIS environment, sayon na lang ang work sa auditor in a sense nga ma-highlight naman ang parts that are most likely erroneous. Nga naay high chance na sayop or na high chance nga kailangan siya og adjustments. Ma-highlight na siya sa system. So you need not go through everything. And then man-machine interface, human-computer interaction. And since computers cannot work alone, it still needs human intervention when it comes to inputting information. So we cannot say really nga we can 100% rely on systems. But the fact remains nga ang errors would be lower as compared to manual operations. Okay, so we study these items in your examination. You need not memorize these 8 items, no? All you need to do is to appreciate sa kaning 8 nga gilista nako diri nganong kailangan man na natong hibaw-an because it would affect the scope of our substantive tests. Okay? So more na ang point. You need not memorize those. At least i-appreciate na nato ay mao di ay mo ding dapat hibaw ta ani. Kaya ang scope sa atong audit ma-change. Okay. Then we also need to familiarize ourselves with the types of computer systems. For a while, guys, huh? Let me just mute myself for a while. Okay. Thanks for reading. Okay. Types of computer systems. Now, even though we are not IT professionals, no, of course, we are not expected to know these the integrities of these computer systems, but at least as auditors, dapat hibaluta how the computers are set up in the auditee. Kaya para makahibaw po ta, unsay impact sa if sayop ni diri nga computer sayop basad sa pikas or dili, or connected ba nag-create bag domino effect ang kaninga error. So mga po na ang reason why we need to know the types of computer systems that our audit client is using. So as to system configuration, we have large system computers. Here, the processing task of multiple users is performed on a single centralized computer. And then we have the dumb terminal. So imagine, let's say we belong in a one department. So each of us has computers. When we try to process information using our computer, for large system computers, ang database ana and ang mo process ana dili ang ato ang own nga computer but rather another hardware dito sa pikas nga department. So our terminals, the terminals that we are using, no, kita nga nag-input, kita nga nag-process, kita na nag-generate of report, we call our terminals as dumb terminals simply because they are not doing any processing. Like ang nag-process lahi nga computer, dili ang ato ang own terminal. So that's why we refer to them as dumb terminals. Kay mura sila og medium. Medium kung asa moagi ang ato ang query padong didto sa computer nga mag-process jud niya ug pabalik diri sa ato. Okay? And then we also have standalone personal computers. So we input data and then in that computer, and then the processing also takes place on the machine itself. So this is usually used by small business owners. So for example, ang imuhang business is milk tea business baron. Unya gamay raman dito raman sa inyo hadapit usara ka computer. So naa dito tanan ang input sa imong data, pag-process na gyud dito. So standalone personal computers. So if you want to audit such type of business, kato raman nga computer ang involved, tanan processing, input, output, naara dito. So at least kahibaw ka nga, any errors that you can see in that computer would only affect that computer and nothing else. Wala na siya na affected nga lain. And then we also have network computing system. They share hardware and software resources. So hardware, what type of hardwares they share? You have the client server, file server, database server, message server, and print server. So hunahunaan na lang, imagine na lang nga, lain-lain nga klase-klase nga server, they perform a specific task. So for example, for print server, ang kani nga server is only tasked to print out reports. Okay? Then file server. This server is only used to store, retrieve, and move data and so on. Okay. So again, you need not memorize these type of servers. Ang akong goal lang here is for you to know what type of servers are there, and for big companies rin siya applicable nga. Daghan specific task Okay. Can you still hear me? I think I was logged out. Ingon siya there nga you have been logged out. Oh, okay. Someone is using the account. Okay. Okay. So for large companies, they allocate specific tasks to different servers. Kay kanang ano siya, sabotable raman sad, di ba? Because if you are a large company, that means you are processing lots and lots of information every day. So for example, for large corporations, they might encode, let's say, 1,000 sales invoices per day. So bugat siya nga task. So that's why daghan og servers kana nga company. Each server performs a specific task. And then they also share software resources. So for software resources, we have the following. So we have LAN 1. I think you've already heard of these terminologies. No? So for local area network, 2 or more computers located within a small, well-defined area. One of the computers acts as the server. So you just belong in the same department, and then your computers are connected through a local area network through wires. This is what we have in my first job as auditor. No, our computers are connected through kaning mga wires. We use local area network such that if I want to access some files sa computer sa akong kauban, I can access it using my own computer. And then main computer dito. So if you want also to retrieve mga permanent files for audit, naara po dito. So maka-access ka sa katong computer sa lain by just using your own computer. And then wide area network uses the public switch telephone network, high-speed fiber optical cable, radios, or the internet. So for wide area network, the term itself defines what it is. So may kag wide area, so wide area not necessarily the same geographical location. So for example, if the business has several branches, and then you want to access some files na stored dito sa other branch, so layo siya geographically, you can still do it using the internet. So we call it the wide area network. And then we have distributed data processing. Hardware is located at least two places geographically distinct sites connected electronically by telecommunications where processing or data storage occur at two or more than one sites. So most big firms even employ BPO companies, correct? So kaning mga BPO companies, they perform specific tasks for a certain corporation. So for example, on the collection aspect, for the sales aspect, ilang gihatag dito sa lain nga company. But the data that they are using katong gigamit sa BPO companies, ma-share pod niya sa sa company itself nga nag-hire niya. So the processing of data is distributed. So natay main corporation here. And then, na-change lagi akong background. Wait sa. natay data diri sa ato ang company, and since dako man tanga company, let's say nag-hire ta og someone else, nag-hire tag BPO company to process our accounts receivable, to process our accounts payable, then we share data with each other. So distributed data processing. Then electronic data interchange. Same na sa siya concept with distributed data processing. We transfer electronic data from one organization's computer system to another. Okay. Anong SBE naman yung akong background? Okay. Okay, and then as to processing systems, we are still on the types of computer systems. So as to processing systems, we look into how the system processes the information nga atong i-input dito. So naay batch processing. So in here, large volume of homologous or homogeneous transactions are aggregated and processed periodically. So every time na i-input nga data dito sa ato ang computer, dili dayon niya i-process agad-agad. Kuwaton pa niya nga mag-accumulate sa siya of the same transactions such as those, and then it will process these transactions by batch, as a batch. And then we also have online processing system, processing of individual transactions as they occur from their point of origin. So more on real time na siya. So once nga mag-encode ka baron diha og sales invoice, automatically ma-post na siya sa ato ang journals. Ma-post na siya sa ato ang general ledgers. So diretso na dili na maghuwat sa uban nga mga transactions. We also have interactive processing, transactions dealt with completely on an individual basis through all the relevant processing operations. So if that specific data would go through different departments, automatic na nga moagi siya dito. Dili na siya step by step. Kaya diba ang computer, makaprocess naman siya o daghan nga mga buhatonon all at once in just 1 second. So, diretso. Most of the time, ang gamiton sa atong auditees are kaning online processing system. Real-time na gid sila. Okay, so kani online real-time processing. This is the same with online processing. Hairline difference lang, very gamay nga difference. Here, ang online real-time processing is i-encode nimo, ma-save na. At the same time, maka-retrieve na ka-diretso. Dito sa online processing, ang pasabot ra ato, inig-encode nimo, ma-store din siya diretso. Ma-process din siya diretso. But kung imo siyang apilan og retrieval, ang question as to whether maka-retrieve ba ka diretso sa updated nga balance after nimo ma-encode na. So diha masud si online real-time processing. Then we also have time sharing. This allows access to eCPU and files through many remote terminals. So just like my example a while ago sa sa amo ang audit firm sa una. So we can access files stored in a different CPU using different terminals. When you say terminals, ay magkalibog ha. Ang kanang terminals, mao na siya ang computer nga gigamit nimo to retrieve a report or to input a query. Mao na ang terminal, okay? And then Service Bureau, a company that processes transactions for other entities. So mo na siya ang technical term, but we commonly refer to these companies as BPO companies, KPO companies. So mo na siya ang mga Service Bureau. Okay, so now we look at audit in a CIS environment. So again, here, the auditor should consider how a CIS environment affects the audit. And true enough, we have learned in our previous slides no, what is the difference between having computers in place that are used to process financial information that is relevant to the audit and compare it with an auditee that uses 100% no manual records. So us as auditors, we should consider how a CIS environment affects the scope of our audit. The overall objective and scope of an audit does not change in a CIS environment. So muna akong gi-emphasize a while ago, auditing theory in general, dili siya mag-change regardless of whether our audit client uses manual or computerized systems. What would change is, so what's changed then? So if dili man gani ma-change ang atong objective sa audit, ang atong scope sa audit, unsa man di ay ang usab. So ang usab ani is the processing, storage, and communication of financial information and the use of accounting and internal control systems. So although, so atong timanan ha, so although our objective as our objective in performing audit is the same regardless of manual ba siya or computerized. Ang nausab lang is ang processing, storage, and communication of financial information because sa una, ang gigamit to process, store, and communicate financial information kay katong mga papel jud. Makakita ka nga gisod sa folders, gisod sa envelopes, daghan kaayo, bulky. But for computers, wala na kaayo paper trails na natanan sa sulod sa computer. And then the use of accounting and internal control systems. So as a consequence, a CIS environment may affect the following. First, the procedures followed by the auditor in obtaining a sufficient understanding of the accounting and internal control systems. So kung sa una, atong buhaton, mag-walk through ta because diba, prevalent man ang segregation of duties when it comes to manual. Akong gi-emphasize ganina, diba, kung manual, kailangan strictly followed ang segregation of duties. So ang imong procedure ato kung manual pa unta, magbalhin-balhin ka, mag-walk through ka nga. Gikan diri nga person ni employee number 1. Sunod, gi-transfer dito ni employee number 2. Transfer ni employee number 3 hangtod sa endpoint. So mag-walk through ka. But karon kay CIS man, dili na ka mag-walk through kay wala naman kaayo segregation of duties. Most of the duties are concentrated into one employee. So you cannot do any more walkthrough but lahi na pod nga approach ang imong buhaton. So later on makakita ta kung unsa nga mga tests ato ang pwede buhaton when doing an audit in a CIS environment. And then it would also affect the consideration of inherent and control risk through which the auditor arrives at the assessment of risk. I have emphasized this also a while ago, di ba? Nga, when we have an audit client nga na ay reliable na computer systems, it could be nga ang control risk gamay lang. When we say gamay lang ang control risk, gamay lang ang possibility nga na ay misappropriation. Gamay lang ang possibility nga na ay errors. So if gamay ang control risk, pwede taas atong ato ang detection risk. If taas atong detection risk, pwede na nga gamay lang atong i-perform na substantive tests. So this would affect our consideration of inherent risk and control risk. And mind you, when we speak of audit risk, by the way, audit risk, di ba, AR. AR is equal to unsa man? Inherent risk times control risk times detection risk. Kanang audit risk din ha, this is not something that we should compute for. Dili na siya formula nga. Um, 10% times 10% times 100% equals. Dili siya. Okay? So when we do audit, what we have to determine first is the audit risk. Unahon nimo og determine ang audit risk. I-work back ra na nimong inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. Because, di ba, kabantay mo anang balik-balik nga phrases sa auditing theory nga at an acceptable level. Ana, reducing the risk to an acceptable level. Familiar? No, balik-balikon man siya ingon. Reducing the risk to an acceptable level. So that means kung may unsa may acceptable level nako, mao na ako ang audit risk. So ikaw magbuot unsa man imong acceptable nga risk sa audit nimo. Is it 5%? Is it 10%? 20%? So at the start, when you look at the audit risk formula, ang first yun ay natong i-determine is the AR and not atong components. So, unahon nimo, dapat ang akong audit risk is only 10% lang. Okay, so mo na imong iset. So 10% is equal to, diha na din ka mag-work back, pila man ang ako ang inherent risk aning item, pila man ang akong control risk aning item. Unya, last nimo i-determine ang detection risk. Because ang detection risk, siya ang mo-adjust para mahimo gyapong 5% ang ato ang audit risk. So mao nang, because if you look at the components of audit risk, what is within the control of the auditor is only the detection risk. We cannot control inherent risk because it is inherent there, so we cannot change it. So for example, when it comes to estimates, it is inherently risky, it is inherently erroneous because in the first place, estimate lang siya. Correct? So, inherent risk, we cannot change that. Control risk, we cannot also change that because it would depend on the level of controls that are in place in our audit client. We cannot change that. But what we can change, what we can adjust is the detection risk. So, detection risk affects the scope of our audit, affects our substantive tests. Okay, so mo na siyang impact sa CIS environment. And then it would also affect the auditor's design and performance of tests of controls and substantive procedures appropriate to meet the audit objective. Okay, so I have emphasized this a while ago. So in short, the auditor's specific audit objectives do not change whether accounting data is processed manually or by computer. So if mo gawas ni siya sa inyong exam, for example, ako abarang exam or sa CPA board exam, dapat clear na gyud na sa ato ang objectives sa audit, dili gyud na mo change regardless of whether the financial information is processed manually or by computer. What will change only is our approach, our substantive tests nga atong i-perform, our test of controls nga atong i-perform. But ang atong end in mind, mao na atong objective, di ba? What is our audit objective? To check whether ang financial statements sa kani nga audit client is not is free from material errors, material misstatements. Mao ra gyud na ato ang objective. But ang ma-change lang is our procedure. So however, the methods of applying audit procedures to gather evidence may be influenced by the methods of computer processing. So for example, when you want to audit, let's say, payables nga part. So if you want to audit loans payable, pag tanaw ninyo sa unadjusted trial balance ni audit client, na ditoy loans payable nga 1 million. So atong i-audit na siya kung sakto ba na siya or dili. Most likely in our audit we have to send out confirmation letters. Confirmation letters, by the name itself, no, confirmation, ipa-confirm nato sa lenders. Most likely banks man yun ay magpautang, di ba? So we send out confirmation letters to banks asking them to confirm whether 1 million ra ba jud ang utang sa akong kliyente nimo. Kay if mayon si bang gi-confirm na ko 1 million jud. So meaning sakto ang 1 million nga loans payable sa balance sheet ni client. But if i-confirm ni bank nga dili oy, naa pa man na siya 2 million or wala naman na siya utang nako, na impas naman na. So at least ma-confirm na to ang balance. So we send out confirmation letters. But sometimes if highly advanced na kayo ang kanina system, the system itself can send out a confirmation letter to the bank diretso through email. So atong evidence ana, instead of the physical letter, sa una mong good physical letter jud ang i-send mo, mag-print jud me, unya filapan jud namo, i-send namo didto na postage kaning na mga resibo sa nga ihatag sa kaning forward sa kaning mga companies nga mo forward sa letter dito sa bangko. Di man nimo i-personally hatag, i-course through man nimo sa registered mail or kanang through LBC. So lahi ato ang evidence din ha, as compared to if the confirmation letter is sent through email by the system itself. Correct? So ang atong i-gather nga evidence ana is the printout baron of the email or unsa pay na ay audit evidence ato makitaan sa computer itself. So lahi nga mga evidence ato ang i-gather if the audit client is using computerized information systems. Then when it comes to skills and competence, the auditor should have sufficient knowledge of the CIS to plan, direct, supervise, and review the work performed. Kaya kung wala ka kahibaw unsay dagan aning mga computers nga iyang gigamit, utro po kang walay know-how, di po ka-audit ana nga system. Correct? So kung dili ka kabang, unsa day gamit ani? Unsa day effect if mag-input ko diri nga system, maka-affect ba siya ani nga module sa kani nga system sa other system? So if di ka kahibalo, dili ka dapat mo perform og audit in a CIS environment. So that is why before the actual conduct of the audit, naagi na siya murag study phase, murag due diligence nga phase. And then, ang audit firm ninyo, ilion sad niya ang mag-comprise man mo audit team ana. So pilion niya ang members para sa audit team nga mo belong sa audit team, pilion niya ang katong mga auditors nga kabalo mo navigate og mga computer information systems. So if katong mga old nga mga auditors nga dili kayo sila techie, di kayo sila ganahan magtanaw mga computers. So most likely they will not possess the competence to audit a client that is using computer information systems. Okay. Then the auditor should consider whether specialized IT skills are needed in an audit, especially for those companies that are using very, very complicated na information systems. If specialized skills are needed, the auditor would seek the assistance of a professional possessing such skills, who may be either on the auditor staff or an outside professional. So if naay part nga complicated kayo nga this is beyond the competence of the auditor, because us as auditors, we are not expected to be IT professionals. So there might be some parts sa atong audit na super ka-technical nga di na jud mada sa atong utok, we can hire a professional to help us in our audit. And then the planning phase. The auditor should obtain an understanding of the accounting and internal control systems sufficient to plan the audit and develop an effective audit approach. So what you should do is, for example, you ask for the manual. Ngayon mo manual kung saan pag-operate ang kaninga system. Ngayon mo itong mga diagrams para makita ninyo ang process. Okay, that's how you should try to understand the accounting and internal control systems of your audit client. So you should be able to understand the significance and complexity of computer processing in each significant accounting application. When we speak of significance, this relates to the materiality of the financial statement assertions affected by the computer processing. So, dili po ta magpataka o pick up kung unsa nga process atong i-audit. Dapat ka na siya is of significance to our audit, dili lang siya ginagmay nga matters. Because again, you've learned, diba, in your auditing theory classes before, nga dili man gyud 100% ang atong audit. No, we just do sampling. And if we do sampling, for a while ha. Sorry sa sorry sa interruptions, guys. Naman mag-agi-agi, so I need to mute myself and to turn off my videos. Anyway, so when we do audit, we do sampling only. We do not audit the entire transactions for the whole year under audit. So for example, you are auditing year 2020, dili man tanan transactions sa 2020. Mamatay siguro tag in-audit ana, no? So atong buhaton is just to take samples and to make our samples count nga bang worth it siya nga gamiton as sample. Dapat significant siya nga item. So when you say significant, dapat material siya sa ato ang financial statement assertions. An application may be considered to be for the complexity portion. An application may be considered to be complex when, for example, there is difficulty in identifying and correcting errors. There is automatic generation of transactions or entries or complicated computations, EDI. So, for example, very simple lang nga audits ang computer system ang ilang gigamit, then easier man for us, especially for example, if ang ilang gigamit lang jud kay kanang mere Excel or kanang SAP Business One, kay you had lessons on SAP Business One before. So, you were able to understand unsa nga mga modules dinhi, so dili ra kay siya complicated for you, but for those accounting information systems are huge, very complicated, so of course you need to understand, you need to be able to assess how complex this computer is, how complex this network of computer is, because that would affect the scope of our audit. Then we go to the nature of the risks and the internal control characteristics in CIS environment. So masabtan na gini nato ito lang pagian. There is lack of transaction trails because unlike for manual, kadalihok na agyoy papel. Na papel, na stamp, na signature sa mga ni-process ana. Na dito. But for computer, it lacks transaction trails. Then, uniform processing of transactions, because once you already have, you already set the operations to be like this. If you tell the computer to do it like this, or do it like this, ha, computer, dili verbally, ha, but through the kanang, unsa ni siya, sa codes ba, sa computer. So if you tell the computer to do it like this, it will always do it like that forever, no? Constant ihang uniform ang ihang processing, unlike sa manual nga usahay makalimot tag perform isa ka procedure, but for computers automatic man, uniform man ang ilahang pag-process anang transactions if you code it that way. And then as I've also mentioned a while ago, there is lack of segregation of functions. We also look at potential for errors and irregularities. So that is why we need to use our test of controls later atong tan-awon kung unsa atong pwede nga i-perform para ma-check if ang computer is naaba siya error sa ihang processing, naaba irregularities sa ihang processing. So later on, may bal-an nato unsa nga mga test of controls ang ato ang pwede na gamiton. Then there is decreased human involvement in handling transactions processed by the CIS. It can reduce the potential for observing errors and irregularities. I have also mentioned this because since ang humans manggod makapuyan, matanga usahay, no? But ang computer di man siya makapuyan, di sa siya tanga. Always siya nga inataragid ihang buhat. So there is reduced risk of having errors, and irregularities in the system. And then initiation or execution of transactions. So sa una, when we, for example, ang pinakaninot na example ani is when it comes to reorder point. Kinumdum mo ang lesson sa inyong mas man siguro na kanang reorder point. So if you are into manufacturing, you should make sure na ang imong level of raw materials dili siya mo go below the reorder point such that if makaabot na kag reorder point, example, nag-set mo nga 100 ang inyong reorder point. It means nga if ang imong inventories niabot sa 100 or ni below na sa 100, kailangan ka mo palit og additional inventories from your suppliers. Mag-replenish ka mo nang reorder point, no? So sa manual, kailangan jud ka mag-monitor pirmi. Pila naman ang akong inventories? Pila na akong inventories karon at the end of the day? Pila na akong inventories at the end of the week? Para if makita nimo nga ang imong inventories is already there on the reorder point or even below the reorder point, you can initiate purchase from your suppliers. So maghimo dayon ka og purchase order, no? Isend nimo dito sa imong suppliers. But for computers, you can already set that sa computer nga. If mo fall ang akong inventories below this reorder point, automatically mo send out siya og purchase orders sa ato ang suppliers. So the initiation, pag-initiate sa purchase, it would change if the company is using computers. So the computer itself could initiate a transaction even without you knowing. Ngala, nag-order na di siya. Nag-order na di ang computer because nahibawan man sa computer. Kaya, di ba, sa computer, naamon po siya dito database sa balances of our inventories. So kaybaw na gyud siya pilay balance sa inventories. And since kaybaw man siya nga ang balance sa inventories ni fall na sa ato ang reorder point, siya rasad mismo ang nag-send og purchase order sa ato ang supplier. And then dependence of other controls over computer processing, potential for increased management supervision at on later, then potential for the use of CAATs or computer assisted audit techniques. So dapat kibaw mo sa nang unsa na ang meaning sa CAATs. CAATs, computer assisted audit techniques. Then both the risks and the controls introduced as a result of these characteristics of CIS have a potential impact on the auditor's assessment of risk and the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. Okay. Kaya sa una sa audit na mo, mag-physical inventory good me every, let's say, September and every December. Okay, so ang timing na mo sa among physical inventory mo na September and December. Before ma-finalize ang financial statements, kailangan mo conduct og physical inventory because diba diha sa ato ang balance sheet, kailangan man og balance sa inventory. At the same time, for the preparation of income statement, kailangan man sa cost of goods sold, pila ang ending inventory, correct? So kailangan jud mi mubuhat og physical inventory, physical count. But if the company is already using computers, up to date man na permi ang ilahang balance of inventory. So you can immediately look for the balance of the inventories every end of the period. Okay, so again, as of this point, dapat na-appreciate na nato ang effect sa CIS environment when it comes to our scope of the audit and our approach in conducting the audit. Then, assessment of risk. The auditor should make an assessment of inherent and control risks for material financial statement assertions. This one is also applicable for manual operations, right? So we should also assess the inherent and control risk as what I have discussed a while ago. The inherent risks and control risks in a CIS environment may have both a pervasive effect and an account-specific effect on the likelihood of material misstatements as follows. So when we say pervasive, hindi pasabot sa pervasive. Ang pasabot sa pervasive is company-wide. Daghan ba? Daghan iyang affected. or it could be na siya isa ka specific account nga na-affected. Okay. So dapat kahibaw pud ta sa iyahang effect. Is it pervasive or is it only related to a specific account? So the risks that may result from deficiencies in pervasive CIS activities such as program development and maintenance. Kay kaning when we say program development and maintenance, dili ra man ka mamili nga kanira ang akong i-maintain nga computer. This is pervasive because when you do system maintenance, you do it sa entirety of the computer system. Network of computers, dili lang specific to this one. Then system software support, also applicable to all computer networks. Physical CIS security. So when we say physical CIS, ang physical, ang hardware jud mismo, kinsa pwede maka-access ana, kinsa pwede maka-touch ana. And control over access to special privileged utility programs. These deficiencies would tend to have a pervasive impact on all application systems that are processed on the computer. And the risks may increase the potential for errors or fraudulent activities. So for example, if there is lack of access control such that anyone can access this computer, bisag ang janitor makalagin kay wala may kuan, walay password, or if nay password, isuwat sa post-it unya ipilit sa kuan sa screen. Kuan mo na kasabay ko ana na nag-audit ko, nalagi ko na yung password pero giswat man sa post-it, unya gipilit diri sa sa screen, sa monitor. So although na ay in theory na sila access control by implementing a password, pero anyone can still access it. So there is a risk of potential errors and fraudulent activities sa kana nga audit client. And then audit procedures, the auditor should consider the CIS environment and designing audit procedures to reduce audit risk to an acceptably low levels. Muna kung giingon ninyo, balik-balik gini siya basta. Auditing theory gani, kadungog gid mo permian ang reduce risk to an acceptably low level. The auditor can use either manual audit procedures, computer-assisted audit procedures or CAATs, or a combination of both to obtain sufficient evidential matter. So dili necessarily nga if imuhang client is into CIS environment, dapat CAATs basta jud imuhang gamiton. So dili na siya mo follow. Okay, even if your audit client is into CIS, you can still use some of the manual audit procedures, or you can use CAATs or a combination of both. Because when we say CAATs manggod, kailangan man sigud ni siya paliton nga software na SAD. So for example, if kamay lang mo nga audit firm, di mo maka-afford og mga CAATs, so you can do also manual audit procedures. Nga inyo rang i-tailor fit para mo fit siya sa audits mga computers. And then issues on system security, paagianan na to ha. So, computer crimes and exposures, these are the usual perpetrators. Hackers, crackers, crack and code. And employees, IS personnel, information systems personnel, and end users, former employees nga naapay access. That's why kung naa gani mo resign, dapat waan na gyud na siya access sa ato ang system. Interested and educated outsiders such as our competitors, terrorists, organized criminals, sila ang usual nga perpetrators nga musud sa atong system to gain access to look at our data. Part-time and temporary or contractual personnel, third parties such as your vendors, consultants, etc., accidental ignorant or village fools. Kita mo na sa mga salida guys nga ang ilang ikuan nga mo perpetrate ba dito kanang mga janitor kunuhay, di ba? Limpyo-limpyo kunuhay sila dito. Unya maka-access mo access din sila sa computer to gain information. So possible ba gyud na mahitabo, especially if ang company is nag-retain siya o kanang mga sensitive and confidential nga mga information nga pwede gamiton sa ilang mga competitors. So it could be like that. And then we have logical access exposures and controls, data leakage, wiretapping, Trojan horses, viruses and worms, logic bombs, DOS attack, computer shutdown, wire driving, piggybacking, trapdoors and backdoors. These are very technical terms no nga. Only IT experts could appreciate, but I'm sure nga nagit tayo general idea of what these are. Rounding down and salami techniques. Kadung mo ning issue nga. I forgot which bank, but naa sila employee dito sa bangko nga round down per me ang mga decimals para ang excess ana ihang kuhaon. So although decimals ra na siya, inig total ni musta ng daghan kay kliyente ang bangko, maabot ra gyapon nag millions ang mga decimal places. So katong pag round down niya ang excess atong mga decimal points, iyang gi-send sa iyang own account. Hinay-hinay. So by decimals lang, o kung tanaw nimo ang transaction dili siya suspicious. Diba kay 0.50 ra guna o centavos ra guna, dili kay na makakatch og attention sa auditor. But when you look at it in its entirety, dako na di ay kaayo, no? Same good sa USC. Usahay mag fully pay na ka. Unya, fully pay na jud at the start of the sem. Nag-end sa semester, tinga na lang ka, nakay-balance ka 20, 25. Nya, wala lang ba? Tinga lang ka nga. Total ni mo anas tanan number of students enrolled. Dak, or gyapon kayo. Maabot na gyapon million. No? But, di lang, tagaan na to sila benefit of the doubt. But, ito siya, nasakpan to eventually ang katong bank employee because of kaning scheme niya. Rounding down. Brute force attack, dial-in, penetration attacks, spamming, spoofing, social engineering such as phishing, wrong spelling niya akong phishing. After S, na H. So, phishing and online scams. Okay, kani, very important kay kung naamoy copy dira of the CPA board exam syllabus, under audit in CIS environment, dimension din sila kaning duha. Controls applicable in a CIS environment. We have general controls and application controls. So let's look at general controls first. Okay, general controls pertain to all activities involving a firm's CIS activities and resources. So kung may kag general, muna kung